There are many perks to living for 21 centuries, foremost among them is bearing witness to the rare birth of a genius. It invariably goes like this: someone shrugs off the weight of his cultural traditions, ignores the baleful stares of authority, and does something his countrymen think to be completely batshit insane. Of those, Galileo was my personal favorite. Van Gogh comes in second, but he really was batshit insane. Thank the goddess I don't look like the guy who met Galileo, or who saw Shakespeare's plays when they first debuted, or rode with the hordes of Genghis Khan. When people ask how old I am, I just tell them 21, and if they assume I mean years instead of decades or centuries, then that can't be my fault, can it? I still get carded, in fact, which any senior citizen will tell you is immensely flattering. The young Irish lad vacay does not stand me in good stead when I'm trying to appear scholarly at my place of business. I run an occult bookshop with an apothecary's counter squeezed in the corner, but it has one outstanding advantage. When I go to the grocery store, for example, and people see my curly red hair, fair skin, and long goatee, they suspect that I play soccer and drink lots of Guinness. If I'm going sleeveless and they see the tattoos all up and down my right arm, they assume I'm in a rock band and smoke lots of weed. It never enters their mind for a moment that I could be an ancient druid, and that's the main reason why I look like this. If I grew a white beard and got myself a pointy hat, oozed dignity and sagacity and glowed with beatitude, people might start to get the wrong, or right, idea. Sometimes I forget what I look like, and I do something out of character, such as sing shepherd tunes in Aramaic while I'm waiting in line at Starbucks. But the nice thing about living in urban America is that people tend to either ignore eccentrics or move to the suburbs to escape them. That never would happen in the old days. People who were different back then got burned at the stake or stoned to death. There's still a downside to being different today, of course, which is why I put so much effort into blending in, but the downside is usually just harassment and discrimination, and that is a vast improvement over dying for the common man's entertainment. Living in the modern world contains quite a few vast improvements like that. Most old souls I know think the attraction to modernity rests on clever ideas like indoor plumbing and sunglasses, but for me the true attraction of America is that it's practically godless. When I was younger and dodging the Romans, I could hardly walk a mile in Europe without stepping on a stone sacred to some god or other, but out here in Arizona, all I have to worry about is the occasional encounter with Coyote, and I actually rather like him. He's nothing like Thor for one thing, and that right there means we're gonna get along fine. The local college kids would describe Thor as a major asshat if they ever had the misfortune to meet him. Even better than the low god density in Arizona is the near total absence of fairies. I don't mean those cute winged creatures that Disney called fairies. I mean the Fae, the Shay, the actual descendants of Tuatha De Danann, born in Tir na Nog, the land of eternal youth, each one of them as likely to gut you as to hug you. They don't dig me all that much, so I try to settle in places they can't reach very easily. They have all sorts of gateways to Earth in the old world, but in the new world they need oak, ash, and thorn to make the journey, and those trees don't grow together too often in Arizona. I found a couple of likely places, like the White Mountains near the border of New Mexico, and the riparian area in Tucson, but those are both over 100 miles away from my well-paved neighborhood near the University of Temp. I figured the chances of the Fae entering the world there and then crossing the treeless desert to look for a rogue druid were extremely small, so when I found this place in the late 90s, I decided to stay until the locals grew suspicious. It was a great decision for more than a decade. I set up a new identity, leased some shop space, hung out a sign that said Third Eye Books and Herbs, an allusion to Vedic and Buddhist beliefs because I thought a Celtic name would bring a red flag to those searching for me, and I bought a small house within easy biking distance. I sold crystals and tarot cards to college kids who wanted to shock their Protestant parents, scores of ridiculous tombs with spells in them for lovey-dovey Wiccans, and some herbal remedies for people looking to make an end run around the doctor's office. I even stacked extensive works on Druid magic, all of them based on Victorian revivals, all of them utter rubbish, and all vastly entertaining to me whenever I sold any of them. Maybe once a month I had a serious magical customer looking for a genuine grimoire, stuff you don't mess with or even know about until you're fairly accomplished. I did much more of my rare book business via the internet, another vast improvement of modern times. But when I set up my identity and my place of business, I did not realize how easy it would be for someone else to find me by doing a public record search on the internet. The idea that any of the old ones would even try it never occurred to me. I thought they'd try to scry me or use other methods of divination, but never the internet. So I was not as careful in choosing my name as I should have been. I should have called myself John Smith or something utterly sad and plain like that, but my pride would never let me wear a Christian name. So I used O'Sullivan, the anglicized version of my real surname, and for everyday usage I employed the decidedly Greek name of Atticus. A supposedly 21-year-old O'Sullivan who owned an occult bookstore and sold extremely rare books he had no business knowing about was enough information for the Fae to find me though. On a Friday 3 weeks before Samhain, they jumped me in front of my shop when I walked outside to take a lunch break. The sword swished below my knees without so much as a "have at thee," and the arm swinging it pulled its owner off balance when I jumped over it. I crunched a quick left elbow into his face as he tried to recover, and that was 1 fairy down, 4 to go. Thank the gods below for paranoia. I classified it as a survival skill rather than a neurotic condition. It was a keen knife's edge, sharpened for centuries against the grindstone of people who wanted to kill me. It was what made me wear an amulet of cold iron around my neck, and cloak my shop not only with iron bars, but also with magical wards designed to keep out the Fae and other undesirables. It was what made me train in unarmed combat and test my speed against vampires, and what saved me countless times from thugs like these. Perhaps thugs was too heavy a word for them. It connotes an abundance of muscle tissue and a profound want of intellect. These lads didn't look as if they ever hit the gym or heard of anabolic steroids. They were lean, ropey types who had chosen to disguise themselves as cross-country runners, bare-chested and wearing nothing but maroon shorts and expensive running shoes. To any passerby it would look as if they were trying to beat me up with brooms, but that was just the glamour they had cast on their weapons. The pointy parts were in the twigs, so if I was unable to see through their illusions, I would have been fatally surprised when the nice broom stabbed my vitals. Since I could see through fairy glamours, I noticed that 2 of my remaining 4 assailants carried spears, and one of them was circling around to my right. Underneath their human guises, they looked like the typical fairy, that is, no wings, scantily clad, and kind of man-pretty like Orlando Bloom's Legolas, the sort of people you see in salon product advertisements. The ones with spears stabbed at me simultaneously from the sides, but I slapped the tips away with either wrist so that they thrust past me to the front and back. Then I lunged past inside the guard of the one on the right and clotheslined him with my forearm to his throat. Tough to breathe through a crushed windpipe. 2 down now, but they were quick and daft, and their dark eyes held no gleam of mercy. I had left my back open to attack by lunging to the right, so I spun around and raised my left forearm high to block the blow I knew was coming. Sure enough, there was a sword about to arc down into my skull, and I caught it in my arm at the top of the swing. It bit down to the bone, and that hurt a lot, but not nearly as much as it would have if I let it fall. I grimaced at the pain and stepped forward to deliver a punishing, open-handed blow to the fairy's solar plexus, and he flew back into the wall of my shop, the wall ribbed with bars of iron. 3 down, and I smiled at the remaining 2, who were not so zealous as before to take a shot at me. 3 of their buddies had not only been physically beaten, but also magically poisoned by physical contact with me. My cold iron amulet was bound to my aura, and by now they could have no doubt seen it. I was the Iron Druid, their worst nightmare made flesh, and they might not have been told who they were sent to ambush. My first victim was already disintegrating into ash, and the other 2 were close to realizing that all we are is dust in the wind. I was wearing sandals, and I kicked them off and stepped back a bit toward the street so the fairies had a wall full of iron at their backs. Besides being a good idea strategically, it put me closer to a thin strip of landscaping between the street and the sidewalk, where I could draw power from the earth to close up my wound and kill the pain. Knit in the muscle tissue I could worry about later. My immediate concern was stopping the bleeding, because there's too many scary things an unfriendly magician could do with my blood. As I sank my feet into the grass and drew power from it for healing, I also sent out a call, sort of an instant message through the earth, to an iron element I knew, informing him that I had 2 fairies standing in front of me if he wanted a snack. He would answer quickly, because the earth is bound to me and I am bound to it, but it might take him a few moments. To give him time, I asked my assailants the question. Out of curiosity, were you guys trying to capture me or kill me? The one to my left, hefting a short sword in his right hand, decided to snarl at me rather than answer. Tell us where the sword is. Which sword? The one in your hand? It's still in your hand, big guy.
You know which sword. Frederick, the Answerer.
Don't know what you're talking about. I shook my head. Who sent you guys? Are you sure you have the right fella?
We're sure.
Spear guy sneered.
You have druidic tattoos, and you could see through our glamour.
But lots of magical folk can do that. And you don't have to be a druid to appreciate Celtic knotwork. Think about it, fellas. You come to ask me about some sword, but I clearly don't have one, or I would have whipped it out by now. All I'm asking you to consider is that maybe you've been sent here to get killed. Are you sure the motives of the person who sent you are entirely pure?
Us? Get killed?
Sword guy spluttered at me for being so ridiculous.
When it's 5 against 1?
It's 2 against 1 now, just in case you missed the part where I killed the 3 of you. Maybe the person who sent you knew it would happen like that.
Angus Oak would never do that to us,
Spear guy exclaimed, and my suspicions were confirmed. I had a name now, and that name had been chasing me for 2 millennia.
We're his own blood.
Angus Own tricked his own father out of his home. What does your kinship matter to the likes of him? Look, I've been here for days, guys, and you haven't. The Irish god of love loves nothing so much as himself. He'd never waste his time or risk his magnificent person on a scouting trip, so he sends a tiny little band of disposable offspring every time he thinks he's found me. If they ever come back, he knows it wasn't really me, see? Understanding began to dawn on their faces, and they crouched into defensive stances, but it was much too late for them, and they weren't looking in the right direction. The bars along the wall of my shop had melted silently apart behind them and morphed into jaws of sharpened steel. The giant black maw reached out for them and snapped closed, scissoring through the fairy's flesh as if it were cottage cheese, and then they were inhaled like jello, with only time for a startled, aborted scream. Their weapons clattered to the ground, all glamour gone, and then the iron mouth melted back into its wonted shape as a series of bars, after gracing me with its brief, satisfied grin. I got a message from the iron element before it faded away, in the short bursts of emotion and imagery that they use for language.
Druid calls. Fairies await. Delicious. Gratitude.